Today we're gonna have a interview with Mr. Tim Canova, and hi Tim.
Hi there, Jenny. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
Yeah, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, I'm Tim Canova. I'm a law professor at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I ran for political office in 2016 and 2018. In 2016, I challenged Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's a congresswoman, in a Democratic primary. And at the time, she was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. And then I ran against her 2 years later as an independent.
Right. Yeah. So you're uh, very well respected progressive politician with, who is pretty rare in America. So today I wanted to ask you a few questions. So first question is, did you watch the last presidential debate?
I did.
Okay, so what is your one word expression after you watch the debate?
One word. Can I use a four-letter word?
Yes.
Seemed to be a shit show. The moderator was terrible. The format of the debate was terrible. I think the format and the moderator were worse than the candidates.
Really?
Which I didn't think was possible.
Uh-huh. So, were you stressed out after you watched the debate? What did you feel? Like, were you sad or?
Yeah, I was a little sad.
Mm,
A couple of days later on, I think C-SPAN,
mm,
they were showing the fourth out of four presidential debates in 1960
mm-hmm,
between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon.
mm-hmm,
And comparing that to this recent presidential debate was like night and day. In 1960, the candidates had plenty of time to make introductory remarks without interruption,
mm,
and the questions seemed to be much more neutral,
mm-hmm,
and they gave each of the candidates plenty of time
mm-hmm,
to respond. And when I watched the recent debate, there was no real introduction. The questions were attempted, I gotcha questions to try to embarrass candidates.
mm-hmm,
And there was really amazing how much falsehood and lies came out in some of the answers to the debate questions.
mm.
So the moderator was not playing any kind of a fact-checking role at all.
Right, right. That's true. Yeah. So, I think I know this answer, but who do you support between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and why?
Yeah, I've said already that I will not vote for Joe Biden.
Right.
I've I've been uncertain whether I would vote, and I've voted in every presidential election in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But the two times that I ran for Congress, it became clear how easy it is for the electronic voting machines to be rigged.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very suspicious that that is what happened in my 2016 race initially.
Mm-hmm.
So I requested to inspect the ballots, and it took many months, and finally I filed a lawsuit. And while the lawsuit was pending, the supervisor of elections illegally destroyed every ballot that was cast. So with such little confidence in the voting machines, I've been uncertain whether to vote. I now think I probably will vote, but I will write in the name of the candidates that I want, with the hope that writing the names in will force them to count my ballot by hand rather than put it through the voting machine.
I see.
If I do vote, I would vote for President Trump. Now, why would I? As you indicated, I'm progressive on many issues. I'm on the left, although not uniformly. I think many of my values are liberal values. I'm conservative on some issues. I'm libertarian on other issues. But I do think that Trump is the most progressive candidate of the two. he's the first president in 39 years not to get the United States into a new foreign war. So you have to go all the way back to President Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s to find someone who did not start a new foreign war. And under Biden and the administration he was in with Obama, they started wars in Syria, in Libya. They had a coup in Honduras. They pushed a coup in Ukraine. There was so much bloodshed. Just looking at Syria alone, hundreds of thousands of people killed, millions of refugees. And then another issue where it's apparent that Donald Trump is more progressive than Biden is in criminal justice reform. When Joe Biden was a U.S. Senator, he chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was the author of the Crime Control Act of 1994, which really pushed mass incarceration here in the United States. And then during the 8 years of Obama and Biden, they privatized a lot of the prisons. So they catered to a private prison lobby. They were locking people up for profit. And here's Donald Trump, who has none of that history whatsoever. And in the short time he's been president, he signed the First Step Act, which is the most progressive criminal justice reform measure in the United States in many decades. So that's just two examples. I can name a number of others. Donald Trump promised to kill the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a multilateral trade deal which would surrender a lot of national sovereignty to huge multinational corporations. And he kept his promise. He killed the TPP, and he started to renegotiate trade deals, I believe, with South Korea, with Japan, with Mexico and Canada. He was well on the way to renegotiating a trade deal with China when the virus from the Wuhan labs hit the United States. So I also think if you judge a president by the enemies he has, you look at Trump's enemies, and it really is a deep state here. It's a swamp, whatever you want to call it, the permanent government, the shadow government. They've tried to impeach him for colluding with Russia and for a phone call with the Ukrainian president. Now, just in the past week or two, the declassified documents show that former President Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, in his own handwriting, had a memo to Barack Obama warning that Hillary Clinton had apparently approved a plan to try to smear Donald Trump with collusion with Russia, knowing it was false, all to distract attention away from her own email scandal, because she had illegally destroyed over 30,000 emails that she had no right to destroy. These were emails on a private server. That's illegal. They should have been on a government server. They had classified documents. So that whole Russian collusion conspiracy theory that was directed at Trump and which impeded his presidency for quite a while. They were investigating him for almost 3 years, and all of that was made up. It was all a fraud on the American public, a fraud on the United States government by the Hillary Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton herself, apparently.
So who will win this upcoming election, you think?
I think if it's a fair election, Donald Trump's going to win it very easily. The public opinion polls are all showing Joe Biden ahead. These are, I believe, very fake polls, just like 4 years ago. All the polls were showing Hillary Clinton would win. And the thing is, you can pay for your polls. You can get polls to say anything you want. They call 600 people quite often, very few people in these polls. And I think there's a lot of corruption in who they are even calling.
Okay.
I don't expect it'll be an election without a lot of fraud and rigging.
Yeah, that's another whole story. So, okay, what do you think is the biggest problem in American politics? I know there are many, but what is the biggest, you think?
Well, I personally think the electronic rigging of the voting machines might be the biggest. followed by the mainstream news media, where you have 5 gigantic corporate conglomerates that now own 90% of the television, radio, and cable TV broadcasters and the print media, 90% of the print media. So they have corporate agendas, and they censor an awful lot of news. And then you add to that the big tech social media companies, and you see this happening all the time now. Twitter and Facebook are censoring people because of their views, whether they have dissenting views on the pandemic and the response to the COVID, or they've got dissenting views about Donald Trump or almost any other matter now. So the First Amendment of the United States Constitution is supposed to guarantee the right to freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And I believe that our speech rights have been essentially eroded by outsourcing the censorship to these huge tech and media conglomerates.
That's the biggest. Okay. So do you think having only 2 dominating parties, like political duopoly in American politics, is a good thing? I mean, we can't really change it. What do you think? Yeah.
No, I certainly think we need more political parties. And unfortunately, the 2 major parties, the establishment parts of them, are completely corporate owned and by the same corporate interests. The same corporate interests have invested in both parties, so they win either way. And, we need parties that represent a much more diverse interest in our society than just these huge corporate conglomerates. We have a Green Party and we have a Libertarian Party, and both of those parties are much freer of any corporate interests. I'd say even completely free of those corporate interests. But they're unable to get over 5% of the vote, I think in part in some of these elections because of the rigging of the electronic voting machines. So there's a great need for a third party. I think that people would respond to a third party, but as long as you have rigged voting machines, you're not going to get these third parties. When you look at 2016, 97 million Americans who could have been registered to vote did not vote. 97 million.
Wow.
Approximately 62 million people voted for Donald Trump, and they say 63 or 64 million voted for Hillary Clinton in the popular vote. So more people didn't vote than voted for either of the 2 major party candidates. People no longer have a lot of faith and confidence and trust in the election system, and that's why they're not voting.
Okay, so what do you think about the so expensive American college cost? Is that something you think is fair or?
No, it's a problem. College is becoming extremely expensive and out of reach for many people. I look back on my parents' generation. My father was from what they call the greatest generation, the generation that served in World War II. And what Congress passed in 1944 was one of the most important measures of the 20th century. It was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. It was known as the GI Bill of Rights. So there were almost, I believe, 16 million Americans who served in uniform during World War II. And the GI Bill of Rights gave them all the right for a tuition-free higher education at any public or private university in the world with a living stipend. And not all 16 million took advantage of it, but quite a lot did. The GI Bill also gave low-interest loans for mortgages, low-interest loans for businesses, small businesses, and health care for our veterans. And Martin Luther King Jr., before he was assassinated, was calling for a GI Bill of Rights for his generation in the 1960s. And that's what I would like to see here. I'd like to see tuition-free higher education. I think it should be tied to service, to national service, where citizens, when they graduate high school, have the choice between serving in the military or I would think most of them would choose serving in a civilian capacity, a civilian conservation corps. And you look to the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt, they had all of these kinds of civilian jobs programs and training programs. And we should be recreating that for this generation. As it is now, if you don't come from a wealthy family and you want to get a higher education, so many people are graduating so deeply in debt that they spend many, many years just paying off their debts. They can't afford to start families. They can't afford to buy houses. So it's part of the entire problem where the distribution of wealth and income and power is so top-heavy now. These are the best of times for the top 1%. Right. But for everyone else, it's become an increasing struggle.
Right. Okay, so you know what super PAC is, right? And money influence in American politics. And what do you think about those kind of money influence?
This is how the corporations buy up the political system, is through political action committees and super PACs. When I ran for Congress, I made a pledge that I would not take a penny from any political action committee or super PAC, and I didn't. I said no to any corporate money, and the problem here in this country, in the United States, is that under our Constitution and under the Supreme Court's interpretations of the Constitution, corporations are people that have First Amendment rights, which includes the rights to speak, to spend money in the political system, and that money is equated with speech. So this has impeded any kind of reforms. Congress passed campaign finance legislation in the past that the Supreme Court struck down in the Citizens United case. So it's a problem. Now, I still, even with all of this corporate money, I still believe that insurgent candidates could defeat well-funded corporate candidates. And I say that out of personal experience. We were able to raise a lot of money online in small donations. Now, this is before Facebook and Twitter started to shadow ban and censor candidates like me. So there would have to be reform at that level to allow insurgent candidates to raise money online without being censored. And I think we would have defeated Wasserman Schultz, a very well-funded, corporate-funded politician, had the voting machines not been rigged and had the election laws been enforced properly.
Right. I know you worked in Stockholm University in Sweden as a visiting professor briefly, right? Before?
Well, the title was a visiting scholar.
Visiting scholar, okay.
Yeah, so I was not actually teaching. I was really studying.
Studying.
So I spent a year studying. I was a Swedish Institute visiting scholar. Mm-hmm. So the Swedish taxpayer paid for me to be there for the year. Mm-hmm. And I studied Swedish corporate law and labor law and the Swedish political system, mm-hmm. and made comparisons to U.S. law, mm-hmm. and the U.S. system.
Mm-hmm. What was the biggest, what were you, were you impressed about their politics? And if there was, what was it like?
Yes, I was. First of all, it's a highly capitalistic country. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like to say that, Sweden and the rest of Scandinavia is socialist. Mm-hmm. That's not really so. Mm-hmm. They have a very generous social welfare state. Mm-hmm. But it is a capitalist system with some very large corporate interests that have thrived over the decades. But when you look at their social welfare system, it's quite impressive. Health insurance and health care for every human being in mm-hmm. Sweden. In addition, when I was there, tuition at the universities was so cheap. Mm-hmm. I think a few $100s a year or even less. Mm-hmm. So virtually free higher education. And they even had maternity and paternity leave at 80% pay, mm-hmm. for 18 months after the birth of a child. Mm-hmm. You talk about a family policy, that's a very pro-family policy. Now, I studied their corporate law, which was very interesting in that large Swedish companies were required on their board of directors to have significant representation of their own workers. The labor unions would select, I think, almost half the board seats. So that might explain why, when you compare the pay of CEOs, of chief executive officers in big Swedish companies, to their rank and file workers, the ratio was about 20 to 1. But in the United States, the CEOs of big companies make about 475 times what the rank and file workers make. So here in the United States, the corporate boards have no representation of their workers at all, and for the most part, except for very, very few exceptions. And the boards of directors are pretty much handpicked in many ways by top management. And the boards will rubber stamp the pay packages of top management and all the other policies of top management. So, you can have a capitalist system that still provides for a dialogue between the various interests in society, a dialogue between the shareholders and top management and the non-management employees. But here in the United States, it's not a dialogue, it's more like a monologue. Just the wealthiest interests of the wealthy shareholders and CEOs get to dictate the terms. And it's been very destructive, I think, in this country. They've pushed outsourcing of all kinds of jobs to the People's Republic of China. Millions of jobs have fled the United States. They have pushed bad trade deals. And it's hollowed out the working class and the middle class in this country. The corporations have bought up the political system. And it's those kinds of conditions where most people feel left behind that led to the rise of Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the right side of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So basically, I recommended you to run for president. As you saw the last debate, so many, I guess, young Americans were so depressed after the debate. People felt hopeless, right? So anyway, do you consider yourself to run as a third party or new party candidate, or do you have future plan to run in any other party?
Well, I'll say that first of all, I'm an independent. I was a Democrat most of my voting years,
right?
And I've left the Democratic Party because of all of this corruption.
Right,
it's
right.
It's everywhere in the party.
Yeah.
It's really incredible.
Yeah, everybody knows.
And while I am supportive of Donald Trump, given the alternative between him or Joe Biden.
But that's not the best choice. There is no other choice. That's why you could just choose him, right?
There's no other viable choice at this point.
Right, exactly.
And I'm not a Republican, so I am an independent.
Right.
I would be open to a third party for sure. But the reality is, after what I've gone through to put my career on hold and my life on hold, for two different campaigns, and for both of them to end under very suspicious circumstances with lots of circumstantial evidence and even direct empirical evidence of rigging and cover-up of the rigging, it doesn't make sense for me to run for office at this point. I think if I ran for dog catcher, they would rig the election against me. So until the election system is cleaned up and there's real enforcement, criminal law enforcement of this kind of rigging, I think it's a fool's errand to run for office at this point.
But okay, so in the future, if you were the president, what three things would you fix right away?
Well, as you can imagine from what we've already spoken about, I believe the election system has to be made transparent and fair. We need a system where we need to get rid of the electronic voting machines. They've been banned in almost every country that considers itself a democracy. And we should replace it with a system of paper ballots that are counted by hand in public. And
maybe proportional representation system as well, right?
I've long been interested in proportional representation, which would open up the system for third parties.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those would be important reforms. reforming our media so
Mm-hmm.
that it's
Oh,
not a
yeah.
corporate dominant.
Another,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
important thing.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, it's a corporate dominated media. It
Mm-hmm.
censors
Mm-hmm.
dissenting voices. It makes
Mm-hmm.
it difficult for representation of people through other parties.
Mm-hmm.
So that would need to be reformed in a big way. And
Right.
I would like to see jobs programs where if there are not enough jobs in the public sector, particularly for younger folks graduating from high school,
Mm-hmm.
that they could serve this country for 2 or 3 years in some capacity where they're working, they're contributing to the communities. It could be working in hospitals, changing bedpans. It could be working out in the environment on conservation projects. And then after 2 or 3 years of that kind of work, they're eligible for tuition-free higher education or vocational training.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be the priorities that I would see as most important right now.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any like advice or topic you wanna talk to like South Korean audience about American politics or anything? Mm.
Well, I'm impressed that South Korea, I believe, has moved away from the electronic voting machines in
Mm-hmm.
recent years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also hopeful that maybe there's going to be some kind of end to the Korean War. I know it's not officially ended. There's been this cold peace, this armistice. I know that there's been diplomatic maneuvering going on, and I'm wishing for peace and prosperity for South Korea. I'm concerned about the pandemic. I'm concerned that we don't really know exactly why this virus was released in the first place, if there was
Mm-hmm.
a political agenda behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm frustrated that there's not been a free space to discuss the proper way to respond to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Economic shutdowns across the board have been very destructive in the United States.
Right.
We see a rising suicide rate. We
Mm-hmm.
see all kinds of ill effects to the public health that go well beyond the actual COVID virus.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to see a more vibrant discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Science moves forward when you're allowed to confront science and there's a dialectic type of confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
What we have now is an official science that censors any dissenting scientific views.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, like I think from this pandemic, the wealth gap between rich and poor got more serious, and there are many protests and violence here and there, everywhere. Like
Yes.
recently, do you know Amazon workers protest with other organizations protested in front of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' house in Beverly Hills?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I saw a
Yes.
report of that.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right.
Mm,
The shutdowns have resulted in a tremendous redistribution of income and wealth from
mm,
working folks and the middle class to very elite corporate interests. And this is what you see across the country here during the shutdowns. Um, Huge corporations like Walmart and Amazon and Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon, they were allowed to stay open, and small businesses were shut down.
mm-hmm.
So, of course, small businesses are failing at an incredible rate here. There's a tremendous rise in bankruptcy, financial ruin, suicides, and at the same time, these huge corporations are doing better than ever.
Mm-hmm.
So, I believe these shutdowns were unconstitutional. I think they violated the First Amendment, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, due process rights under the Fourth Amendment. They even violated the Fifth Amendment, which says the government cannot take property without just compensation. And here, the shutting down of businesses, allegedly for a public purpose, there was no just compensation given to those small businesses for ruining them. So these were blatantly unconstitutional acts. It was tyranny, medical tyranny, and tyranny in every sense of the word. And it's still going on in a big way, not just in many parts of the United States, but in countries like Australia and Great Britain. From what I've been watching, it's really unbelievable how fascist the policies have been, where there's not been legislative bodies making decisions. Quite often it's just executive decrees. And even if it were legislative bodies, legislatures are not allowed to just violate individual fundamental rights and freedoms. That's what we have a Bill of Rights for and a Constitution here in the United States.
Right. But do you think if those like economic sufferings not addressed quickly and effectively, do you think this violence or protests will just get bigger and bigger and America will be very unstable?
Yes, potentially that is the case. And I worry in the immediate future what's going to happen at the election time. That there are groups that are being funded by billionaires to create unrest. When people are out of work and having trouble paying their bills, it's easier to influence them to pay them to riot. I think there should be investigations into whether that is what was happening during the kind of looting and rioting that we saw starting in late May and June in this country. And that's what I worry about will happen. A lot of these riots and looting are very illegitimate, and they're being done and coordinated for political reasons.
Oh, really?
It's not just people who can't afford to pay their bills and have nothing to eat. It goes well beyond that.
I see. Wow. So, okay. Oh my God, time flies. So, what do you have any last word you wanna mention before
Well,
we?
we've covered an awful lot of different issues, and I appreciate that. No, I'm available to speak with you anytime in the future. I appreciate the interview. My last words would be to wish you and your family and other people in South Korea safety and good health, and to just keep fighting for justice in this world.
Thank you, Tim.
You're very welcome,
Yeah.
Jenny.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.